What was your overall impression and what stood out to you immediately?
There was a lot around AI, transformation projects, how to manage it, how it's going to change the world of work as we know it, but also the impact that it has on HR, but how HR can have an impact on it.
HR is no longer a support function. It's more a strategic driver to drive business performance.
I think leaders get put to the side a little bit, unintentionally in most circumstances, because they're so well established. They've already proven their resilience. They wouldn't be in that job if they weren't capable.
The philosophy of one size fits all doesn't really work anymore when it comes to leadership or change, and what works for one person doesn't work for the other.
What felt most relevant to the challenges that HR leaders are facing right now? Hello and welcome to a special episode for an inside look at the changing world of HR, emerging workforce trends and what employers need to prepare for next. My name is Suhini Wijayasinghe and I'm the Head of HR Solutions here at People to People. Joining me today is Leanne Lazarus, Specialist Recruitment Manager from People to People Brisbane, and Kaajal Khelawan, Head of Human Resources Delivery, also from HR Solutions. So thank you for joining me, Leanne and Kaajal. So we recently attended a major HR conference together and we heard from industry leaders, workforce experts and HR professionals about the issues currently shaping people and workplaces. So today we'll be sharing the ideas that stood out to us, comparing our different perspectives and look beyond it to explore the broader changes we are seeing across HR and the employment market right now. So it was a very interesting couple of days. There was lots to go through and, it brings us to the discussions that we've been having over the last sort of 48 hours. We've got a couple of questions that we're going to work through in terms of what we've learned and we'll go from there, and some of the themes that we really saw present throughout the conference. So now that we've, had some time to digest all of that information, what was your overall impression and what stood out to you immediately? Leanne, I'll start with you.
Oh, look, I think it's always a great conference, and every year there's certain themes that come through. I think this year there was a lot around AI, transformation projects, how to manage it, how it's going to change the world of work as we know it, but also the impact that it has on HR, but how HR can have an impact on it. In terms of the broader business. I found that really, really interesting from that perspective. Some great speakers shared some great knowledge, some great statistics that sort of made you sit there and go, wow, that makes you think. There was some good comedy to some of it, just making a bit of lightness about it, as opposed to it all just being very serious doom and gloom. And I love the fact that there was both aspects of it's going to be great, but there was also that aspect of we need to think. It's not just about the speed. It's sometimes you've got to do a little bit slower to make sure it's done right.
Yeah. And there was this really funny moment where I think one of the speakers mentioned that, the word unprecedented being used all the time. And he put up this really interesting slide where it was just, I'd really love some precedented times. I could really go for, a period of just a known situation, which I think we've all sort of had to accept that that's just not going to be.
Yeah.
And I think there was a theme with that throughout the conference where you could see that people were quite, not the people in attendance, but the general theme of work at the moment where people were, running on empty. There was a lot of conversation about, well-being, but I also saw that there was a real focus towards leadership. In previous conferences, there was lots of conversations about what we can do for our workforce, etc. And now it's sort of changed in the sense of it's really leaders' responsibility to filter that down rather than the expectation of just implementation and for employees to take that on board. And that truth has been present for many, many years. It was just more of the highlight. Kaajal, what were your thoughts on that?
I think to add to both of your comments that you made, I think the biggest takeaway was HR is no longer a support function. It's more a strategic driver to drive business performance. And there was a lot about HR leaders having courage and to being able to be adaptable during a challenging environment and to lead the business through uncertainty and moving away from the traditional ways of working and guiding the business in the direction they need to go in, using AI as an opportunity rather than as a limitation or to eliminate anybody's role. It's how can we improve our business by using AI in the moving forward.
The other thing one of the things I took away is when they spoke about there is so much transformation, and AI is here. It's not going away. It's going to be here, and it's going to come through more and more as you know as we go. But one of the speakers, he said, the early bird catches the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese. And it was quite interesting because everyone sort of sat there. Then all of a sudden, you sort of heard the penny drop, and everyone was like,
me included, because I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean the second man? And then I got the vision of the mousetrap. I was like, I get it now.
Yeah. So sometimes we there's also a lot of transformational AI fatigue because so much is coming through so quickly, and sometimes it is just about slowing it down a little bit, doing it right, and maybe getting a better result or outcome from that change.
Yeah. You know, that segues into one of my next questions, which was what themes kept appearing across different sessions and conversations throughout the conference. And I think the biggest takeaway was change fatigue. It's just non-stop. There was a really interesting statistic around, in pre-COVID times, it would be 1 to 2 changes per year for per employee. And now we're looking at an average of 10. And if you think about just how exhausting that is, just even thinking about it, and I think it's just the fact that it's on multiple different areas. And yes, the theme was around AI and well-being, etc., and leadership, but those are just a small piece of the pie. There's as we're all aware, cybersecurity training, and then there's system upgrades, and then there's changes to legislation that's constantly happening that will impact various teams. Like, for example, your poor payroll teams, like, congratulations on keeping up, because it's a quagmire, but it really highlighted that desire for precedented times that's just not coming anymore, and it's a thing of the past. And the 20s, I think, are really going to be feels weird saying that, we think of the 20s and we think of the 1920s, but here we are living in the 20s in a new century, and getting to the tail end of it. And it's going to be defined with just monumental change, both inside and outside the workforce. That's what really was present for me in terms of those themes. What did you take away from that, Kaj, in terms of
I think one of the biggest themes were around employee wellbeing. I mean, a lot of the time we go into these conferences and we talk a lot about HR and how to do processes and what the best practice is, but the main focus for me was around some of the sessions that I attended was around employee wellbeing, but also understanding their capability and their skill set. So not just looking at their job description, but looking at the skills that they bring to the role, how to upskill them, how to drive the business in a positive direction by upskilling the workforce rather than just going, oh, this person's not performing or not meeting the requirements of the role, but also assessing capability, but doing it well. I don't think a lot of people and a lot of businesses understand how to do a capability matrix, and that was one of the key drivers of the conference. And one of the sessions was around a capability matrix of how to actually assess your people against a matrix.
And having that benchmark. Yeah.
Oh, look, I think I agree in the sense of from the wellbeing perspective, and the philosophy of one size fits all doesn't really work anymore when it comes to leadership or change, and what works for one person is not going to work for the other. But I think we also then have to look at, when we are looking at those transformation projects, is looking at where that accountability sits, who that agent is, whether it sits with one person or a team, but then look at the capabilities they have to do it and how they can then weave it into what they're currently doing as well. I think sometimes that people walk up and go, right, so Suhini, you're going to do this project. It's up to you, and then walk away. And it's like, well, hold on a second. What else do you have on? What else are you busy with? How are you going to cope with it? Are your skills there?
Yeah.
It's about really,
especially with all the other changes as well that we just spoke about.
Absolutely.
Do you have the time to accommodate this additional?
Correct.
an probably equally important change that I'm asking you to do.
Correct.
Yeah.
And AI, I mean, as I said earlier, AI is here to stay. And one of the scenarios or examples at one of the sessions I went to, they were talking around looking at AI about it is going to change the workforce. It is going to change how we operate. And some companies automatically see that as a great, so we can implement an AI agent, which means we can get rid of headcount. It's going to save us money. But there was an example of IKEA where they brought in Billy, who was the AI agent who was going to focus on customer service, but that was going to impact over 8,000 vacancies globally.
Yeah.
And instead of them going, well, that's great, we're going to save costs on headcount, they sort of went, what can we do? And they looked at, and you're talking about the reskilling, looking at the skills that they had, and they knew those catalogs back to front. So they created a whole new revenue stream by utilizing those skills, upskilling,
Yeah.
to keep or retain a lot of that talent, but generate revenue at the same time. So looking at AI, it's not just about work and save time, save money, and headcount. If we look at it from the broader, it can actually, if you coexist and you can work together, you can actually do so much more.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point. So of everything that you heard, which was a lot, what felt most relevant to the challenges that HR leaders are facing right now? Kaajal, if we want to start with you.
Out of everything that I heard was all about leaders and the influence that they bring to their teams and to the business.
Yeah.
So as a leader, how you show up is really important, and how you think that you are perceiving yourself is also really important for you to be mindful of, because your team will shadow that. So if you're stressed about something or you're not quite happy with a business decision, your team can feel that, and it's important for us to be mindful as leaders as to the perception we want to give to the team and how we want to grow.
All about the vibes.
Yeah.
I don't know which generation that word applies to. I think it's like millennials probably, or maybe it's Gen Z. I don't know. But yes, the vibes are very important.
Yeah.
But that's a really interesting point that you make, because I think I was in that session with you where, it was about the shadow that you cast on your team, and therefore why it's so important for there to be a focus on the well-being of leaders. I think leaders get put to the side a little bit, unintentionally in most circumstances, because they're so well established. They've already proven their resilience. They wouldn't be in that job if they weren't capable. And so it's kind of like this, oh, well, they'll come and talk to us if there's a problem. But really, it stems from the top down, right? And the fact that the data showed that there was a total, I don't think anybody put their hand up in that room, and there was probably about 500 people in that room when the question was asked, is there some sort of determining factor or a KPI around leadership well-being, or is it tracked in any meaningful way? And not a single person put up their hand. So to your point about the shadow that we cast, it's kind of going to be a bit ominous shadow if we're not feeling well. So that was a really interesting take. I think for me, what felt most relevant was, given the decade that we're in, and I'm not going to use the U word, but given the decade that we're in and the things that we've gone through in such a short space of time, it almost feels redundant to underpin all the activity that we're trying to do on the words like stability, consistency, simplicity, reliability. I mean, that's out the window, and I think we almost have to walk first into the fire and go, I think the words that were used was volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And it's almost like going, okay, that's almost a thing in the past now. This is what we're walking into. How can we now design things accepting the truth that's in front of us, and knowing that there are certain things within our control and not. And for me, that was a real game changer, because I think we were trying to fit the square peg into the round hole, being like, we've got to keep things consistent. We've got to keep things simple. And yes, you still want to do those things, but in the context of the situation we're in, it's like, okay, things are unstable and things are volatile. So how do we manage accordingly now? Yeah. What about you, Leanne?
I think there were a couple of things, but going back to the leadership side of things, it was one of the sessions that they asked the questions around talking from an HR leadership perspective. What are the things that you need or you find you don't get. And often HR teams are some of the most under-resourced teams in an organization. But who looks after the people? Right? But even looking at the broader leadership, leaders are human beings, and there's a lot of expectations that they need to be everything for everybody.
Yes.
When in actual fact, that's impossible to do.
Yeah.
I'd love to say we're not one, but we're not. So you can't expect that leader to be absolutely everything for everyone. Sometimes it's about being somebody for someone
Yes.
at that time.
Yeah.
One of the examples was, when you look at your executives, your CEOs, and often, if they walk into the room, you sort of go, oh, kind of thing. When in actual fact, they're human beings. And one of the examples that one of the amazing big not-for-profits was saying, the chief HR officer there, was she's got a really good relationship with the CEO, and she was like, rule of thumb, if you're going to come to my desk to talk to me, make sure you greet and talk to one of my staff, one of my team, right? Say hello to them, ask them how they are. That's what you need to do. And even diarising at times, you need to go for a walk around the floor just so people can see you, talk to people. But that became the norm. And the team were like, wow, they know who I am. They got to say hello to me. It just breaks down that hierarchical feeling, even though that is still the CEO, and you still respect them and they've got a lot on their plate. But just that little bit, like you were talking about the vibe, that just changes and impacts that culture piece a little bit more.
Yeah.
Where it's a little bit more comfortable, maybe not necessarily the right word.
Yeah.
But you're valued.
Yes.
People want to not know. They don't want to only know that that they add value. They want to know that they are valued.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's interesting that you mentioned about leaders being people and who looks after HR and everything, because there was a really interesting start in one of those sessions where they were saying it was like 1 in 4 people felt that they were thriving, which is quite low still, but 1 in 3 of them were thriving but also critically close to burnout. But and it's such a dichotomy, isn't it? Like you're thriving, but you're almost at your wit's end of how much you can cope and handle, because we're going through this period of work now where it is such a collision of worlds. You can't really avoid the fact that your employees are, and it doesn't matter what rank they are facing certain pressures from the external world. And whether that's financial, whether that's geopolitical, whether that's got to do with your family, like everything's quite at a pressure point in one way or another. And so, although that stat is just crazy to me, it's also not surprising either. Yeah. Was there any particular idea that you initially disagreed with or felt skeptical about, but then afterwards you sort of thought, you know what, that might be true? Anything pop out to you?
I think there were a couple of the statistics in the sense of when they were talking about sort of AI coming in, how it's been used, everything else. One of the stats that they gave us was around how many employees actually push against the grain and will do things specifically to try and actually bring the downfall of AI or the system that's been brought in. And people are and it was interesting because it came up with actually quite a few of the Gen Zs were pushing against it and trying to sabotage it in a way, whether it be, coming in and bringing their own phones and using their own version of Claude or ChatGPT or Copilot, as opposed to using the safe system in the business. That I found quite interesting. But then when you think about it, people are nervous around it and the impact it's going to have on them or their roles or in the organization. So that I found quite interesting. But then on the other side, you sort of go, well, potentially.
Yeah. I didn't necessarily find anything that I was going, I totally disagree with that. And then my opinion was changed. What I did find was one of my opinions that goes against the grain of what a lot of people believe felt confirmed.
Okay.
And that was around AI usage. We have AI thrown in and we've now seen it year after year, convention after convention, meeting after meeting, and not just conventions, just day to day, all the time. AI is everywhere, and it's almost forced into our faces of this is forever, permanent, going to change the world. And while the two things can be true at once, and I don't disagree with it to a certain extent, I always held this belief that it really wasn't as utilized as people make it out to be, and as entrenched as people make it out to be on an individual level. I think, and even from a company level, I think that there's a lot of noise about you've got to do this. And, the tech bros will love to tell you that, it's everyone's using it and you've got to use it. Well, no one's got to do anything, to be fair. Whether you get left behind or not is a different question. But it was interesting because they made us put up our hands of like who actually uses it day to day, who's an expert and a creator, who's a user, who is very sporadic with it, and who just doesn't understand or get it and doesn't want to. And the overwhelming majority were in the last two categories. And it was a handful, like an absolute scraping handful of the number of people that said, we're creators, or our business is a creator and a power user. And we've been in this bubble now for 3 years at least. So it was really interesting to see that, it's not as prevalent as people make it out to be. And I think it also ties in with some of the stories that have sort of been emerging in the last 6 months of big organizations. Now, the name eludes me, but it was a really big, I'm not gonna guess a name because obviously then it's out in the universe forever. But it was a very notable multinational billion-dollar company where they had at the start of the year made lots of their engineers redundant and replaced with AI. And 6 months later, they're now rehiring engineers because I think they were software engineers, because AI just couldn't actually do what they needed them to do from the creative piece. Now, maybe that might change in the future as these large language models improve and whatever else. But it's interesting to see how many people are sort of going, it's not as widespread as we thought it was going to be.
But with that, one thing that threw me was one of the speakers was like, on average, we were on seven AI platforms, right? And I was like,
no, we're not.
I'm not 7. Who's on 7? And then they were like, well, think about it. You might be on Facebook or your YouTube or TikTok or LinkedIn or right through to your systems that you're working on, all these different things.
Yeah. Google search now just automatically giving you AI.
Absolutely. It doesn't ask you anymore, it just gives it to you.
Yeah.
And how much time it does, it's been seen to save time, but in actual fact, how much time do you spend in the back end having to review the data that it's given you? Because it's not 100% yet.
Yeah.
So yes, that floored me when she said 7, and I was like,
that can't be, but it is. Yeah. But it's interesting though, right? Because although they say 7, I believe that when we're talking about the use of AI, are you actively using it? There's a difference between it being forced onto you and you not having a choice, and then deciding later on whether it was time effective or whatever, as opposed to, okay, I'm going out of my way to conduct an activity, right? And that's what we saw with the .com boom, which was, the internet is everything. The internet is everywhere. Like we get that, but it's almost like a passive thing now rather than something that was going to explode as much as they said they would. So that was interesting. Kaj, did you have any notes on that?
I think it was just similar to both of your comments that you made, but I think the biggest thing for me was noticing how many people were resistant to AI. I think there's a real fear that people think that AI is going to replace you, but it doesn't. I don't believe it's going to eliminate your role. I think it just adds opportunity and it creates time. Because if you can automate some of your processes using AI, that saves you 10 minutes of the day that you could be doing something else. Yeah. It was interesting to see how many people are so resistant to it because our business, we use AI quite a bit with different aspects of our processes. So it was interesting to see other businesses how they don't actually utilize it at all, or on a very minimal scale.
Yeah, that's a point that's really close to my heart, because I'm a firm believer of things are far less scary when you actually spend some time becoming comfortable with what it actually is. And so I would really encourage anyone that's listening right now that's in that position of they're worried about how it might impact their job. And the reality is there are going to be jobs that are going to get impacted. We saw that with, social media. We saw that with, the Ford's construction line. I don't think that's the right word, but every single transformation period of work saw jobs be eliminated and new jobs created. And I think we're going to see something similar. That's not taking away anything from the individuals that may ultimately become impacted from that. That's going to be a very scary time. But that being said, even if we weren't going through a huge transition phase, we've been through GFC. We've been through, the running millennial joke is how many, like every couple of years there's a world first crisis of some sort, right? And although we shouldn't accept those things as, just part and parcel of life, we are resilient. We have gone through them. We can do it again. It is possible, and it's not necessarily the end of the line for people. And I think the sooner that people start looking at AI like MS Office, which is you just got to know it. In most jobs, you just got to know it. So I think if people take that approach just to get at least a basic to intermediate understanding, it will go a long way for them.
I think there are going to be roles going to be impacted, but there's also going to be redesigning of roles based around AI.
Yeah.
There'll be new AI generated roles that do become, because when you think about AI, it is, there's algorithm, there's technical, but it's a lot of it is still driven by people. And that I don't think will ever change, because yes, it might be eventually a learning system, but they're still going to need the human impact or the human input into that.
Yeah. So in terms of, the workforce right now in its immediacy, and, you can do all the planning we want and everything else. What do you think if you had to pick one, what do you think the single biggest challenge is for HR leaders right now in this moment?
I think it's just the complexity of the workforce. We've got so many generations in the workforce at the moment.
And Gen Alpha are knocking on the door.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think each generation has got their own sort of ideals of what they want and what they need. And as I said earlier, that blanket approach of manage everyone the same doesn't necessarily work, but it's really hard for HR, because you've also got to there's that fine line between bowing to everyone and then not actually getting the outcomes or the deliverables or, what you're trying to achieve, because you're so thin spread. It's about balancing that. I think that's a really big challenge, but then also driving that change at that, sitting at that table and actually driving the change, asking the hard questions is another aspect from that side. Sorry, that's two.
Kaajal, what are your thoughts?
Just answered what I was going to say, but that's okay. I will come up with something else. I think adapting the workforce based on capability is one of the biggest things in order to keep up with the change that's happening. A lot of organisations, we are seeing that they are very reactive. They're not ready for the change that's coming. They're not ready for tomorrow. They're prepared for anything in the past, but not for things that are coming up. So it's thinking about your organisation and how you want to respond to the changing environments that we're seeing, and preparing the business. And HR can really drive that by being ready and having the capability in place with hiring the right people with the skill set and the potential, rather than just hiring anybody.
Yeah. I think, in my opinion, the biggest challenge is that the extent people's we always had this assumption that people's personal lives and work lives were already enmeshed, given how much time that we're spending at work. That's no mystery, but this has now gone to a whole different level, right? It's now active cost of living pressures that are affecting people, and not only that, we're seeing at the moment petrol prices like that. I think the excise just ran out. We're going to see 20-30 cent increase to fuel costs, and people immediately go, oh my god, how am I going to fill up the car? But then not only is that impacting the employee, but then you think of every single supply chain everywhere that's going to get impacted by it as well. And we can no longer separate those are personal challenges, those are professional challenges. They are now starting to completely combine, and the lines are getting really blurred. And so, you've got this real sticking point about where does well-being start and stop. And there's no answer right now. there isn't, as much as we would like to claim that there's a silver bullet. It's really difficult because it's all becoming quite cyclic, because there's all these, things that are happening out in the world that people may or may not be aware of. And then people are skeptical about the things that are happening because, we were just talking about verifying the information that you're receiving and all these critical thinking skills, and we're already all exhausted. And, that's impacting how the cost of running business. And then you've got people also being impacted with the cost of running their house.
Yep.
And so you've got leaders who are dealing with both sets of pressures in some circumstances. And then you've got employees dealing with a host of other things. And given how multicultural our society is as well, it's impossible to ignore the geopolitics, because you've got people who've got families in certain areas that are, and that's impacting their well-being. And so now you come to work and you're not just necessarily dealing with, my employee, God forbid, might have been a death in the family, or they're going through a divorce or something. Those were really serious things that you had to support and work through. And now you're just adding all of this geopolitical, financial, economic, and it just keeps going and going. And then add to that, you've got to complete your AI training and your, cybersecurity training. And then you've got to work out what system you're working on and whether you haven't breached privacy. And it's just a lot. And you can't separate it. And I think that right now is the biggest challenge, and it's quite stressful for people because there's no answer. There's no answer, and we're all just sort of navigating. And I think that goes back to embracing the fact that it's volatile and it's unstable. And I think the sooner we embrace that, it's going to be a little bit easier. So given that we've just been talking about those particular challenges, what are your thoughts around, employee expectations when it comes to flexibility, career development, and work-life boundaries becoming more realistic? So, we've just talked about how everything's merging together and it's really hard with all the blurred lines. And we know, it's asked every single day, what kind of flexibility do you offer? What kind of career development, etc. Are those boundaries becoming more realistic, or, are they more difficult? And I know we already touched on how difficult it is, but I think it would be good to sort of break that down a little further in terms of what those specific challenges might be.
I think there again, you go back to the generational workforce again, because each generation is in a different focus period in terms of their career. If you're talking about a Gen Z who's come into the market, they're building their career, they want the balance in terms of career progression, but work-life balance. If you're looking at your Gen Y, or your millennials, they've built a career, they've now potentially gone and bought a house, they may have settled down started a new family, so they're looking at their expectations around that flexibility and hybrid is going to be potentially different to maybe someone who's in the baby boomer generation that's transitioning out of the workforce. So I think it's always going to be a challenge, but I think it's just about looking at the business and what works for the individuals and for the business. But one of the things that was said in the conference was ask your employees, listen to your employees. It doesn't mean you've got to do it all, but listen and find out what they want and then balance it out from there.
Kaajal?
I think the biggest challenge for employees is creating consistency and fairness across the workforce, but also meeting the business needs, but also being able to meet the employee based on their individual needs. So I think organisations that do really well at this is explaining the why on their decision. Just saying a flat out no is not going to work. You're going to explain the why, and employees will be much more accepting to your response, and they'll accommodate more because you're working with them rather than just giving them a generic answer.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely going to be one of the challenges that employers will find.
Yeah.
In the next the next 12 months.
Yeah. It's I think if I was to offer any advice around that from my experience would be, not every employee is going to be able to provide everything, right? Like, we know that, flexibility is all well and good. There are employees that just can't do that based on the work, based on their financial situation. There could be a mum and dad business. It's such a variety. We can get so trapped into just thinking about big corporate or big blue collar, for example. Not every business can provide everything. So I think, yes, definitely the why, but also whatever you do offer, do it well. Even if it's small.
Yeah.
because that's what you can go into the market with and go, these are the things that we do offer, and it's done in a really meaningful way, and it's present, and you can see it the moment you walk through the door. And that could be the, you know, the flexibility, or it could be that they've got a great, you know, external benefits of some sort. Whatever it is, just pick something that you can work with, whether it is financial or not, and then commit to it. Because we are in an era where I think a lot of these benefits or EVPs, etc., they kind of go, oh, you know, this is great to recruit and hire someone, but people have done research on you long before they've even applied for the job, and people will leave reviews and people will talk. So if you can show that you do it well in your business, they will actually appreciate the authenticity to go, well, at least what they are giving me, they're going to follow through with it. Yeah.
I think authenticity is a big thing.
Mm.
And one of the sessions was, you know, if you talk about your values and your benefits and your EVP, it shouldn't be a glossy paper that's or words written on the wall. It should be something that's lived and breathed, and everyone needs to be on that same page about it.
Mm.
But even when to gain trust, leadership trust is about your authentic self. They were talking about, if you know, communicating to the business and communicating more and more often, but being genuine in that. You know, if you're recording a video for the business because the change is happening, don't make it look like a news broadcast where, you know, you've cut everything out to make it sound good. If you make a mistake, go, oh, dang it, and move on to the next thing. People respond to that. That authentic leadership is a big thing to build trust.
Yes, agreed. So moving on to, I guess, a little bit more about, you know, the candidate side of things. Despite more candidates being available in some areas, employers are still really struggling to fill particular roles. And I think that was, you know, a theme that we saw in the conference as well in terms of accessing that talent. And I guess, why do you think the skill mismatch continues to be such a persistent problem at the moment?
I think from a business perspective, because there's change happening all the time, there's you create this idea of what skills you need, or what the role looks like, or what the role should be looking like. And the same is from a candidate's perspective. They come into that meeting with their expectations around what they think it is. And going into the role, sometimes it doesn't happen. There's different things that can impact that. But I think when you look at certain industry sectors, if you look at your, you know, your frontline, your healthcare, your disability support workers, their roles, sometimes there's different things that could impact it. The fact that they are working remotely, you know, they're not sitting in an office with everyone else. They're not sitting in front of a computer to automatically get the information. It is a very competitive market in the sense of they're sought after. And it's not necessarily a career. If you look at your disability support workers, where you go, this is my career progression. It's a role that you go into and you stay in. So I think there's a lot of things that organizations need to take into account, whether it be the succession planning, where they grow, whether it be additional training, whether it be additional certifications, whether it be that additional support, whether it is around an AI tool that is available to them to maybe help with certain things. And one of the disability support chief operating officers that was there, come from an HR background, was talking about creating an AI tool where, from a compliance perspective, if there's an incident report, some of those support workers don't have the time to then finish their shift, go home and do it. Create an AI tool where they can talk into the phone and say, this is the incident, this is what's happened, that's, you know, the scenario. It goes through to someone that vets it and then obviously manages it in the back end, but looking at tools that can maybe streamline it to make their life a little bit easier. So I think there's a couple of things companies can look at doing to attract people in those hard to fill roles.
I think one of the things that I saw that really struck a chord with me in terms of that mismatch is people, or I guess employers and hiring managers, not understanding that there is a different skill set now that's important for the current world. And, you know, like we were talking about embracing the volatility and etc. There was I just saw there was a really great table on it, and I can only remember bits and pieces of it now, but I remember saying, you know, in the 20th century, logical thinking was what was really important, and being able to follow instruction was, you know, key. And while those things are not unimportant anymore, it has now completely shifted to critical thinking is far more important than necessarily logical, just with all the misinformation out in the world, as well as, you know, being able to adapt, getting given a set of instructions and then being able to adapt to any changes that come with it, rather than going, I'm going to just follow this from point A to B. Can you think outside of the box? Can you be creative with this? And again, not a universal application, but I think it's that generational differences, right? We're sitting in an era of people going, okay, well, this is what I know to be true and what it would require success in my context. Not necessarily the case anymore. And I think that also it's a disservice to our younger generations as well, because they are being molded in a particular way, whether we like it or not. They are being molded in a particular way. We all were told the dangers of social media, and to be fair, we did nothing about it to prevent Gen Z from falling into the traps that we are all falling into now. We knew and we didn't. And so now they're molded in a certain way, and we need to be able to adapt to that and go, okay, how can we make this work, rather than just being like, well, what you're bringing to the table is just simply not good enough, right? So, yeah. Kaajal, any thoughts on that as well?
I think from my perspective, from a candidate and recruitment side of things, I think a lot of organisations have a vacancy. They don't think about what this role is actually going to do, and they want to hire the exact same match of what they had 5 years ago. And not thinking about the future capability of the organisation, where you're heading, those transferable skills that a candidate can bring. So thinking about those things when recruiting, rather than just jumping straight in, will really help an organisation from a skills perspective to really grow. And I think that's the biggest thing that we heard about, growing the organisation and not being stagnant. That will really help future growth.
So lastly, what were some good final takeaways that you learnt, and not necessarily in relevance to any particular topic, but just things that you felt struck a chord with you and held a lot of meaning, and would be something valuable for our listeners to be aware of? Yeah.
I think one of the things is organizations need to invest in their training and upskilling. There was a saying that was, what if I spend all this money training my staff up and then they leave? And the response was, what if you don't train them and they stay? And if we're looking in the market at the moment, the way it is, there is a fair bit of job happening at the moment. People are, even though if they're not happy and they're not thriving, they're staying because of the uncertainty of what's happening around the world. I think we need to invest. If someone does leave, well, they leave, but you've left. They're leaving in a better place than what they were before. So I think we definitely need to have a look at the upskilling to help redefine those skills for the future. Because that's going to set businesses up for success as well, by having the right skills in the right places with the right people.
Yeah,
it makes a big difference as well.
Yeah, Kaajal?
To add to the skills piece, but I think the biggest takeaway was around the leaders, uplifting the leader capability to be positioned well, to lead your team, to guide them in the direction that you need to go in order to grow or perform as a team. That was the biggest thing. That was a key takeaway. But also thinking about your leaders' well-being, and they often get put to the wayside. When we talk about employee well-being, we actually don't think about the leader. We think about everybody else underneath. So really thinking about how your leaders are feeling, what development they need and what support they need, because with the different generations in the workforce, how you manage people are very different. And leaders don't have the skills or the capability, some of them, to be able to adjust. So I think that's the biggest takeaway, is build the capability of your leaders, because then they will be well positioned to adapt to change when it comes.
Exactly. And I think there was a really good saying where leaders cannot give what they do not experience themselves. So if they are, they can't be expected to offer flexibility or generosity of time, or have the patience to train and develop people if they are not receiving that themselves, or they're in a position of burnout. I 100% agree, because that was also one of the biggest things that I've always been a big proponent of, empower your leaders, and the rest can come a little more easier than otherwise. But there was one thing that really rung true to me, because it's something that I've maintained throughout my whole career. And I was really fortunate with my mentors who taught that to me, which is, if you really know what you're doing as a leader and you feel competent, you never shy away from surrounding yourself with people that are smarter than you, that are more capable than you, because you want people to ultimately be able to take all of your knowledge and surpass you. And I've been, rummaging for a little saying, and it came through with one of the sessions where the role of a leader is to make themselves redundant. And that was just perfect. Like, it really, I think sometimes people can take that the wrong way, where they think that, oh, well then, where's my position in it? But
Intimidates,
Yeah.
right?
exactly. But what they're missing from that point is you don't stop learning either. Just as your team doesn't stop learning, and it's infinite and it's continuous and there's no finish line, thus is the same for you. And so I think when leaders try to take that approach, it flows on in a really meaningful way about going, what can I do to hire the right people? Why am I trying to box somebody into this particular cookie cutter, or they can't have any other skill set, or they can't be trained and developed into something else because their own mindset is such that, oh, well, they can't be smarter than me. Do it.
Yeah.
They're going to make you look good. Let them shine, and I think that that's a really important takeaway for in this whole chaos and everything else. Don't forget to have faith in your own capability. And once you do that, it becomes really easy to go, I need everybody around me to be the best, and I'm going to help them get there. So that was really a big takeaway for me, and what I would want to share with everybody as well. So look, that brings us to the end of today's discussion. There was a lot to unpack, and thank you for joining us again for the second year running for doing our little session today, and I hope you've learned something as well. As I've mentioned, we are going through a really intense period of change, and I think it's really important that we don't gatekeep the knowledge that we learn, and sharing and collaborating is really going to be the way that we move through the next couple of years. So I hope you have learned something, and thank you so much for joining us.